Good evening, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us in this Zoom talk tonight, organized by Associations of Engaged Buddhists. So if this is your first time joining us, just a brief introduction of who AEB is. So we are a non-profit organization formed by a group of lay Buddhist practitioners and supported by an ordained Sangha. And we hope to help addressing the needs of the wider community with the skillful and practical application of the teaching of the Buddha through Dhamma talks, meditation practice, meditation retreats, and community services. And we have a beautiful retreat center at the Southern Highland of New South Wales called Vejasala. If you can see like behind me, that is Vejasala. So where we hold all our retreats there. So if you're looking for a community to practice and learn, we wish to be able to support you mentally, spiritually, in a safe, caring, and supportive environment. And if any of you haven't joined, please consider joining as our member and subscribe to our newsletter. And for information on how you can support us, please visit our website, and I will post the link in the chat too. So tonight, we are very happy and grateful to have Thay Thich Thong Phap coming back to present a very interesting and yet sensitive and challenging topic about voluntary euthanasia. So for those who hasn't known Thay, Thay Thong Phap is a fully ordained monk in a Vietnamese meditation tradition. So his teacher is the most venerable Thay Trích Thanh Tu, a meditation master in the Truc school. Originating from Port Adelaide in South Australia, they then moved to Tasmania. He now lives in the southern Flinders Ranges with a small community of Anglican religious brothers and sisters. He has a master's degree in social science and counseling and a diploma in psychosynthesis, and was the Buddhist representative chaplain at the University of Tasmania for 4 years, prior to working for 4 years as the Buddhist chaplain at Oasis, the Multi-Faith Chaplaincy Center at Flinders University, South Australia. And they grew up within the Christian church, having been a novice monk in an Anglican Benedictine community, and has had a 40-year commitment to Buddhist-Christian dialogue. His chief work as a Buddhist monk is in supporting the education of contemplative care workers of whatever philosophical or religious persuasion, but has a particular interest in developing Buddhist contemplative care workers. So welcome, Thay, and thank you so much for agreeing to discuss this challenging topic with us tonight. Let's put our hands together and welcome Thay.
Thank you, Meredith, very much. I think we might start with some meditation. Would you like a guided meditation, or are you happy to sit by yourselves? What would you prefer? A bit hard for everyone to speak at once.
Maybe a simple guided meditation.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. So sit. I don't know what you're sitting on. If you're sitting in a chair or sitting on the floor. But make sure that you're sitting comfortably and that your back is straight. It doesn't have to be rigid or like a ramrod, but just relaxed and straight. And with either with your legs crossed or your feet on the floor. Your hands can rest one on top of the other, or you may feel more comfortable if you're sitting with your hands on your thighs. Our posture is really important. So while we're sitting upright, imagine that you have a fishing line attached to the crown of your head at one end, and at the other it's attached to the ceiling, and your head is bobbing in on the end of the fishing line. So just imagine that. And you imagine again that you take the fishing line between your thumb and your forefinger and you gently pull it up. And you'll find that your back straightens really nicely. It would be good not to lean back in the chair, otherwise there will be the tendency to go to sleep. And there's nothing wrong with going to sleep, but it's not the same as meditation. So you're sitting there, your shoulders are relaxed. You may prefer to keep your eyes open or closed, whichever is most comfortable and you're most used to. If your eyes are open, make sure that they're just very softly open and that you've got a position, a point about 1 meter in front of you where you can bring your eyes to rest. Allow a very gentle smile to arise on your lips, just like the smile on the Buddha image. And notice that when you allow that smile to arise, it helps to relax all the muscles in the face. So just take 3, not excessively deep breaths, but 3 deeper breaths. And as you breathe in, notice that you are breathing in the freshness of the air around you. And as you breathe out, you let go of the stale air that's in it. Breathing in, breathing out, and paying attention to your breath as best you can. Breathing in, breathing out. Your mind will inevitably wander from the object of your meditation, which is your breath, but that's okay. That's the nature of the mind to wander. So when you have noticed that your mind has wandered, very gently and without any judgment of yourself, bring your attention back to your breathing. And you can use the words in on the in-breath and out on the out-breath to help focus your attention in the present moment. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on your breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention as best you can on your in-breath and your out-breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath, on the ebbing and the flowing of your breath. Breathing in, breathing out. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in-breath and your out-breath, watching the ebbing and flowing of the breath. Breathing in, breathing out, keeping your attention on your in breath and your out breath, resting deeply in your heart center. So thank you very much for inviting me back to give another Dhamma talk. Before we start the Dhamma talk, though, I would like, first of all, to acknowledge and give expression to my love for this great and wonderful continent on which we live, this island continent, for its enormous age, its great beauty, and to remember our responsibility to care for it. I also want to acknowledge the people, the human beings who originally came to live on this land, the indigenous people of this country. We acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging elders. And we express our sorrow for what the British settlers did in this land, and we commit ourselves to transforming the racism of this land and making it a place where everybody is welcome, where everybody has a place in the body politic of this place we call Australia. Okay, so it's lovely to see all these faces. So I can't see some faces because they're hidden away, but if you want to stay hidden away, that's just fine. I expected some people from South Australia as well, but I can't see anyone from here. So tonight's talk is about a topic that's contentious and challenging and not straightforward. I want to start, though, by telling you a story, or two stories, about a man called Stephen Tettis. Stephen, I met in 1990 when I worked for a respite and recreation program called Take 5. Stephen was from a Greek Australian family and he had Down syndrome. He couldn't talk, but he could vocalize, and he did pretty constantly. He also gesticulated a lot. And I sometimes wondered whether he also had autism, but I'm not sure. It might be just who he was. He was short and chubby, and he had a moustache, and he looked like a Turkish effendi, who, you know, those leaders of the Ottoman Empire who invaded Greece. And he was intensely lovable. He was from a Greek Orthodox family, and at that time I was a practicing Anglican in the church. And so in 1990, when it was Easter, it was a joint Orthodox and Western Easter. The Orthodox Church has a different calendar for Easter from the Western Church, but every so often we celebrate Easter, or the Orthodox Christians and the Western Christians celebrate Easter at the same time. So in 1990, it was a joint Orthodox and Western Easter. And so I took Stephen for a drive to Strathalbyn, which is a lovely little town to the south of Adelaide on the Filioque Peninsula, to visit a dear friend of mine, Phil Fackender, and we took along with us Easter eggs to share with her. On the way, we listened to cassettes of Easter music, and we were enjoying tootling off into the country for the day. But on the way, I started to think about something called the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed, this major creed of the Christian tradition. And it was a doctrine about the relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit that separated Stephen and I as Christian brothers, as brothers in the faith. It's one of the things that keeps the Orthodox Church and the Western Church from cooperating more fully. And while I was thinking about this really saddening question of how we can divide people by doctrine and dogma, Stephen heaved himself up in the car seat, turned towards me, looked very lovingly at me, and held out his hand for me to hold. The Filioque clause was not a concern for my Greek Orthodox syndrophos, my comrade. Being human in relationship was his primary focus. And that was a great teaching to me. After some months, maybe a year later, I was able to get Stephen to get out of the car in the city in Adelaide and to catch the tram from Adelaide to the beach suburb of Glenelg with all of its restaurants and coffee shops. After coffee together, we got back on the tram to go back to the city and onward to his home. As we were waiting for the tram to leave, about 6 or 7 teenagers threw themselves through the open tram windows very noisily and sat behind us. Stephen was engaging at that time in a lot of vocalizing and gesticulating like this. That plus his appearance was obviously difficult for these young people to manage because they started to laugh embarrassedly and say very unkind things about Stephen. Again, after a short time, Stephen hauled himself up again in his seat, which was no easy feat for a man of his size, turned around to face the young people and held out his hand to greet them. Now, I wish I could say they responded warmly to his expression of his humanity, but they did not. Instead, they called him a weirdo and other names like that. So I decided it was time for me to intervene. And I said quite simply that he wasn't a weirdo. In fact, he was simply reaching out to be friendly. No one was convinced, while all the other passengers sat there pretending nothing was happening around them. These events were very clear lessons to me concerning Stephen's capacity to understand what was going on around him and to respond in a very positive way to what could have been for him a very dangerous situation. This was a lesson to us all about what it is to be fully human, in spite of labels that are the really disabling elements in the life of this young man living with Down syndrome. What a sad loss of an opportunity for us all to move in the direction of our own completed or perfected humanity. And so today there are still doctors who apply pressure on parents to terminate pregnancies where it is known that the child will have Down syndrome or spina bifida or some other form of what we call a disability. The implication is that all of these sentient beings who have such a precious contribution to make towards our lives and the lives of their family are deemed to be dangerous and burdensome. Best to bump them off. In my view, euthanasia of any kind transgresses the possibility of the completedness of our humanity. But from a Buddhist point of view, human existence is both precious and rare. And we all probably know that wonderful story which the Buddha tells of the blind turtle who comes up every 100 years and manages to put its head through a wooden yoke floating in the ocean. That's how probable it is to have a human rebirth. And so our human lives are both precious and rare. Along with all other phenomena, we ourselves are marked by three characteristics: impermanence and a lack of substantiality, which we call anicca. Impermanence includes this aggregate of mental and physical factors called me. So there is no permanent, substantial, and independent self. This we call anatta. The third mark of existence is dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness, which arises out of our not accepting anicca and anatta. Instead, we live with the self-centered thought of I, me, and mine. The self-centered thought is, in fact, the cause of unsatisfactoriness or distress or dukkha. A gradual acceptance of these three facts ought to enable us to accept old age, sickness, and death. Dukkha is the first of the ennobling truths of the Buddha. The second ennobling truth is that unsatisfactoriness comes from tanha, or craving, attachment, or thirst to our wrong understanding of all phenomena, including ourselves, as substantial, permanent, and self-existent. This craving includes wanting what we do not have and not wanting what we do have. And that's perhaps one of the most recognizable forms of our suffering, is that when we get something we don't want, we suffer. And when we don't get something we do want, we suffer. One form of craving is the craving for annihilation. And in Pali, that's called vibhava tanha. An end to our suffering is what we crave. This results from an aversion to that which we do not like. In this case, old age, sickness, both mental and physical, loss of independence, and pain. It is craving that impels us from one life to another and needs to be let go of rather than surrendered to. Cutting life short, however that is achieved, and for whatever reason, limits the potential for spiritual growth, which includes acceptance of old age, pain, and sickness, and relinquishing craving and the fulfillment and peace that comes with that acceptance. The law of karma is also a consideration here. Karma is the law of cause and effect applied to the physical and mental world. Mentally, it refers to the causes and conditions that give rise to ethical or moral decisions and their fruits. For many people of the way, if we see our illness as the result of our own action in this life or some previous life, particularly if it's not associated with old age and the likely result of a lifespan coming to an end, we will accept it more patiently, though not necessarily fatalistically. We will do something about it. Death is seen by a Buddhist to be a great opportunity, as it stands at the important and difficult point of transition from one life to another. What is important at death is to approach it without regret and fear, but with joy for the good we have both received and achieved. It is also seen to be important not to be drugged so that one can experience consciously, fearlessly, and joyfully the process of dying or transition fully. This is what Buddhism calls a good death. Now, all of that doctrine there, or that teaching, I accept. That's my basic understanding of why I can't agree for myself with voluntary euthanasia. Euthanasia is a Greek word meaning an easy death, and it's a process of dying that falls into four categories. It refers, first of all, to death that results contrary to the wishes of the person. And this is called involuntary euthanasia, and the death penalty is an example of that. Secondly, it refers to the choice of the individual who feels that their life either no longer has sufficient quality or involves too much unnecessary and unmitigated pain. This is a form of suicide and is referred to as voluntary euthanasia. Thirdly, there is pre-voluntary euthanasia, and that refers to the direction given in a living will that indicates that under circumstances of mental incapacity, the sufferer wants to die. And fourthly, There is non-voluntary euthanasia, which refers to the choice of a significant other bringing to an end the life of a loved one whom they believe experiences too much unnecessary and unmitigated pain and diminishment without any hope of living a life of quality. From a Buddhist point of view, euthanasia of any sort involves killing another, which Buddhism holds to be an action derived from unskillful intention and resulting in harm. So because euthanasia is a volitional act or an act of will, it is karmic and produces fruit in this present life or the future lives of the perpetrator. To this extent, Buddhist teachings claim that euthanasia is an unwholesome action leading to unwholesome results in this or other lives. To bring a deliberate and premature end to a life, and particularly to a human life, is considered to be the most seriously harmful undertaking that can be made. To refrain from killing another human being is the first of the patimokkha or pratimoksha rules undertaken by a Buddhist monk or nun, and the breaking of this rule earns the penalty of a permanent exclusion from membership of the monastic sangha for the remainder of the lifetime. So action rooted in greed, hatred, or delusion is unwholesome and bears unwholesome fruit both now and into the future. Euthanasia is seen to result from both hatred and ignorance. Hatred is seen here as either revenge in the case of involuntary euthanasia or aversion to suffering in the cases of voluntary, pre-voluntary, or non-voluntary euthanasia. Often, euthanasia is seen as compassion or putting someone out of their misery, but this view is rooted in delusion. Peter Harvey, a Buddhist ethicist, calls it unwise compassion. It is unwise simply because pain, sickness, and dying naturally are, as explained before, opportunities to learn that everything in life is impermanent and that our attachment to these things is mistaken. Avoiding the process through euthanasia impedes our learning at this powerful transitional moment. To my mind, it is also an opportunity to allow my life to run its full course according to the causes and conditions that gave rise to the whole experience of my life. To cut that life short, in my view, means that the process of a whole life is not completed, and it will simply mean that the task of this life is yet to be completed. This is the understanding I have of Buddhist teachings, and I personally hold to these teachings. Buddhist viewpoints on the issue of euthanasia are not, however, absolutist. In 2006, at the 4th Global Buddhist Conference in Perth, Western Australia, Dr. Philip Nitschke, the well-known Australian proponent of voluntary euthanasia, was invited to put his position. He spoke of 2 cases he had dealt with. The first case was that of a Buddhist man in Darwin who sought euthanasia on account of a prognosis of unmitigated pain without hope of a continued life. This was the first assisted death in Australia that Dr. Nitschke oversaw. The second case was that of a woman of 79 years who, though physically healthy physically and mentally, did not wish to risk becoming physically incapacitated or demented. She believed that 80 years was a long enough life and asked him to assist her in her suicide. He did so because if he had not, she would have attempted it on her own behalf anyway and may have caused herself much more harm. That was his rationale. He asked the conference for a Buddhist response to his actions. The only response given, I noted, was that it was not disagreed with by anybody, was that for Buddhists, what is more important is not so much the act, but the motivation behind the act. If he had acted compassionately and with the person's consent, then that forms the basis of his motivation. And that's very persuasive. But I think This view falls under the category of unwise compassion. The motive is an aversion to pain and diminishment, and so the act of killing in the first case is based in aversion and delusion. The second is an example of the needless bringing to an end of a life that had not even begun to unravel through illness. The woman's decision was based entirely on the fear that her life might end in a particularly painful way. All we can really know is that we will die. We cannot know how, and we can't know when. She assumed the how part and robbed herself of an opportunity to live fruitfully and joyfully, accepting the possibility of interdependence or her need for the support of others. While Dr. Nietzsche's decision looks compassionate, I think it was unwise compassion. He did try to talk the lady out of her decision, but was persuaded by what amounted to a threat. If you don't do it, I will, and I will make a hash of it. And now comes the bit that it doesn't confound me. It's all part and parcel of Buddhist ethics, really, is that things are not as straightforward as we might think they are. It's important to hold a position for your own sake, but you don't necessarily hold that position for everybody else's sake, because life's more complex than that. There is a nun in my own Vietnamese tradition who put another case to me. She described the situation of a person with a terminal or chronic illness in a Vietnamese hospital. The treatment available to the patient may not be sufficient to ameliorate the person's situation, and the treatment itself, as well as its administration, the provision of adequate food and general care that would be taken for granted as free in an Australian hospital, are not likely to be available in a Vietnamese hospital. Everything would have to be paid for, including injections and their administration. And I imagine this situation is current in many, many countries in the world who don't have the resources to provide free medical care or health care to its citizens. Everything would have to be paid for, including injections and their administration. Even changing bedclothes would have to be paid for. And this could cost so much that in the case of poorer families, they would be quickly bankrupted, unable to continue paying for necessary treatment and causing ruin for the family. In this case, the choice to die is the consequences of what Harvey, the ethicist, calls foregoing the means of further life. It's not necessarily a choice to kill oneself as a result of euthanasia, but it is a choice to allow oneself to die for the sake of others. Now, I think in this case, there are also other ethical issues that have to be faced, such as the differential between developed and developing nations in their capacity to provide healthcare. And that means ethically for the global economic, and what that means ethically for the global economic system. Given, however, that the spending on healthcare and normal family incomes are not going to be increased in the short term in Vietnam and other developing nations, what the patient is presented with is a set of circumstances in which an absolute ethical decision would be difficult to justify. And that's also my position. Two other cases are very personal and indicate that my reflection on these matters are not just theoretically based in Buddhist doctrine. The first concerns my own mother, who suffered for many years from Alzheimer's disease. From 2000 to 2006, she underwent an accelerated deterioration of her mind, and due to a fall and a broken hip, her body. In 2004, my sister and I had her admitted to a nursing home where she lived for a further 2 years until it became clear that all of her capacity for independence and enjoyment of life was rapidly going, and that she would die sooner rather than later. Eventually, she stopped talking and became bedridden. All that was left for me to do for her was to reassure her that she could depart this life knowing that her job was done, and also to meditate by her bed and chant for her each evening. I was given the choice by the registered nurse in charge of palliative care. I was given the choice by the registered nurse in charge of the aged care facility of palliative care, thereby allowing inevitable illnesses to take their course, rather than employing intensive or intrusive medical interventions, which would only put her inevitable death off by weeks. My choice was for palliative care, as it was for my sister. At the age of 83, her lifespan was coming to an end as a result of a disease common in the very old. My choice could never have been for euthanasia. She was my mother, through whom I came into this life. At risk to her own life, she had borne me for 9 months. She had loved me all her days, making very clear to me all of my life that wherever she was, that was my home. And that meant a great deal to me, to know that I had a place of belonging, of inalienable belonging. In the following final 2 days of her life, it was clear that my demented mother was saying her goodbyes to her children and letting go of this life. She died peacefully in my arms, being told of her beauty and her goodness, of my love for her, and of the necessity to depart now without fear. The second case that makes all of this very personal to me refers to my own brother, who is 7.5 years younger than me. I loved my brother from before he was born, and I've told him this many times. I've witnessed all of the landmark events of his life, his sitting up, his standing up, and his first steps, his first words, and everything else that has made up his life. On December 31st, 2004, I was the best man at his wedding, my last public act as a layperson. The next day I went to Vietnam to be ordained as a novice monk. And now each week I go to Adelaide to be with him in the midst of his experience of vascular dementia. We work in his garden. I take him to the gym, to Bunnings where he can window shop, and to the dog park with Joey and Lucy, where we eat Subway for lunch and he gets to be with and talk to people. We talk about everything, including his great sorrow at the ways in which the subsequent disability has changed his life. He is also able to talk to his old brother about the relentless physical pain he experiences and the despair that he knows. He presumes he will die before me, and we have determined that if that happens, I will conduct his funeral, as I have done for both of my parents. So recently, from within his experience, he has asked me whether I will contact Dr. Philip Nitschke on his behalf in order to arrange euthanasia. I've said, no, I won't do that, and you cannot ask that of me. My commitment to him and to his wife is that I will journey with him every step of his path, working to enrich his life, to encourage his acceptance of life as it is, and to love him to the very end. I was with my brother when he took his first steps, and I will do the best I can to be with him when he takes his final steps. And there's one other final concern that is very significant for me. Should voluntary euthanasia be made legal? For Buddhists, the choice for euthanasia has to be made by the individual involved. In spite of my holding to a particular Dharma position, I'm not going to tell other people what they must and mustn't do. That is their choice. That is up to them. And the same would be true if I was asked about abortion, for example. I have a position, but it's your choice and not my business. And if I can support you without judgment, I will. But I can't agree to it. So I think that all kinds of counselling and alternatives need to be offered. But in the end, it is the person's right to choose, I feel. It cannot help the person if the society sits in judgment on them. However, what has to be decided is whether the medical practitioner who assists the suicide, as did Dr. Nitschke, is acting unlawfully by enabling the death of another. When voluntary euthanasia is made legal, as it has been in South Australia and other places, and the boundaries are stretched with regard to what amounts to a viable life of high quality, it then becomes possible that an increasing range of people can be included in the category of those deemed entitled to euthanasia. This is especially applicable to very vulnerable people who do not have a strong voice of their own in the public arena and who are socially devalued persons, such as those labelled intellectually disabled, like my friend Stephen. An ethical choice in these cases is to give an appropriate value to all human lives and to ensure adequate levels of support to vulnerable people in order to enable them to live as rich and full lives as they have a capacity for. Here, strong advocacy for the vulnerable and devalued is necessary, but that is made much more difficult if there is no legal restriction on who is deemed to be viable or not. How can we be sure we would not descend into a world similar to that created by the Nazis? So it's also my experience that this is not easy to negotiate with those who advocate for voluntary euthanasia as an individual right. I've been involved unwillingly in a number of arguments with people. And I'm not even saying that I don't agree that they should have the right to choose when to end their life. I'm just saying that I can't agree to that, nor can I participate in a decision like that. So now I'm going to have a bit of water, and I'm going to ask you, what do you think? I've just put my opinion, my stance. What's yours?
All right, I think there will be a lot of questions. You're welcome to unmute yourself and ask Thay, or if you don't want to speak, you can put your opinion on the chat. I'll try to read that out for you. And before that, Thay, we have a special guest tonight with us, Bante Akaliko. Bante has just put a statement in the chat to say that in New South Wales today, voluntary euthanasia legislation was introduced into Parliament. Is likely to go through tomorrow to become a law.
Yep.
Oh dear. Right. Hien, you have a lot of questions. Do you want to ask a question?
And not just questions, you might completely disagree with me and think that I'm a religious fanatic or something like that. And you may have a very different opinion, and I would welcome that. It is born again Buddhist, but you know, I'm open to suggestion.
Okay.
I think yeah, we all know that I was the originator of this question, and I'm glad to have listened to you, Bante. And I think you've given me your perspective of the issue. It has actually enhanced my understanding of the subject matter and probably have some influence on the way I'm thinking through this issue. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yes.
And Bante Akaliko has a question.
Thank you, Thay, for that talk and for broaching this subject with the community, because it's something I know that people often ask about, and they often ask the Sangha about, which is awkward because not only can we not, kill another human as monks, we can't even direct someone to do any killing. And even saying to someone something like, you should end your life, would be a parajika offense if they follow through on it. And so it's difficult for the Sangha to speak freely about this. And we often end up falling back to these positions of dogma. And in pluralistic societies like ours, we add an addendum, as you did, and as I always do, which is that it's about choice. And so I thank you for that, because I think that is good position and a helpful one, and that it will relieve people of some sort of guilt and feeling that they're horrible people and things like that if they decide to do it. But my question is, isn't it a fact, and I know that you work in many hospitals, that people are being eased out of life all the time by caring doctors and by caring nurses for administering medication that will end their life? And isn't this being done without the consent of the patient? Wouldn't it be better if these sorts of things that happen, that the patient is at least informed and can make a decision whether they want that to happen?
First of all, Bhante, I think you've been very generous in talking about medical staff easing people out of this life. That's a very generous approach to it, as opposed to saying killing them. And it's true, and I'm pretty sure it was true in my mother's case, that I mean, in order to manage the pain, she was given regular injections of morphine. And quite often what happens is that people, they just increase the dose and eventually the person dies from the result of the morphine. I think your question as to whether people should be told this, I'm not sure, but I suspect it has a lot to the reason that they're not, and that there's no real serious investigation of this with the person, with the patient, and with the patient's family, is that the medical profession itself, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, and I'm glad we have a medical profession that works really hard, especially at this time of the COVID-19 virus. But I think there's a certain power differential in the society between medical professionals and their patients. Medical professionals have a great deal of influence over the decisions made by people, and can be very persuasive, and sometimes, I think, can be very blinkered in their view. For example, I've often felt when I go to the doctors said, what's wrong with me? I have to do this. And if I don't do it, well, it's my problem. It's not their problem. They've done their job. And that's sometimes I find very hard to argue with. I think the power differential between the medical profession and recipients of medical help is great. And so it's possible that people, even if they did negotiate these things with people, that they could negotiate them in ways that would still be very convincing of their medical position, or they just don't listen. They may not listen. And people, I know that there's one person in the group tonight who is a hospital chaplain, and I'm looking at her right now. I know that hospital chaplains, and I'm not a hospital chaplain, I don't have the affinity for that role. I've worked in hospices and hospice care, but it's quite often there's a sense in which the doctors particularly have a great deal of control over what happens. How you address that, I don't know. But recently, I think it was on the ABC, I watched a program about a family who had a little girl who had Down syndrome. And the doctor was not insisting, but putting a very strong case for her being aborted before she was born. And these parents, I don't know whether they were religious people or what, but they held a very strong opinion that this child was their child. And it didn't matter what she was like, she was their child, and they were not going to have her aborted. And as it turns out, she was a gorgeous little kid whom they loved and included in everything in their lives and in their family's life. But the point is that the doctor, who is in a very powerful position, especially when people are feeling vulnerable and uncertain of what the future could mean, are very easily persuaded. So I think that question of a power differential is a really big issue. And I think that one of the things that might be required is some form of advocacy for patients or for families who are confronting these kind of issues in the face of a big medical bureaucracy. I could say those things because I'm probably at heart an anarchist. So I think that's my answer to what you're saying, Bunty. I don't know if that's satisfying or not. I'm sure you'll tell me.
Bunty, you have any response to Thay's comment?
Why, Bunty?
My only, I guess the crux of my question is, if it's already happening.
Yes,
it's already happening without consent, and people are already easing people out or killing them, or however you want to put it, then what's the difference?
Bunty, are you talking about, like, I don't know, like palliative care? Like my father was in palliative care at the last stage of his life. I know in palliative care is that they will be given morphine as much as they like. I think those people, the administrator, they knew that they are at the end stage of their life. So their intention is just to reduce their suffering. So I think by giving them a lot of these medications is not with the intention of killing them, is to reduce their suffering, isn't it? It boils down to the intention.
But the effect is that eventually they'll be often given a dose of morphine which will kill them.
Yeah. There's no limit to how much they're given, but I think it's like the perception of people who put in palliative care is like, okay, you are there to die, and then my job here is to reduce your suffering. Isn't it like, you know, what they think in the palliative care unit?
I've worked in palliative care in Hobart, both in a palliative care hospital and within community palliative care. I don't think palliative care units are there because with the intention of providing an opportunity or a context for people to die in. They're very clear that the person will die, but their attitude is also that while they are in palliative care, they will have the opportunity to live as fully as they can until death overtakes them. So, and I kind of think it's true that in a palliative care unit, a person will receive a certain dose of morphine to prevent more pain than not. But I wonder about whether there is not the possibility of, say, Buddhists, for example, figuring out other ways of pain management, like using our minds to deal with the pain that arises. There's this great story I heard somewhere of a Chinese Malaysian woman in Malaysia, I think, who refused to have any painkillers or anything like that. And she did eventually die of the cancer that she had, but the whole time she worked really hard to manage the pain through meditation and practice of mindfulness. Now, that may not work for everybody, but there may be people for whom it does work, and it would be really helpful to have in our health professionals who could gain the skills required to enable people to deal with their pain using their own minds, rather than requiring medications that will inevitably lead to death. I don't know that there are doctors who are deliberately killing people, but It's such a, such a tricky area. How do you know, and how can you be sure that this isn't, I mean, there's so many examples of older people, for example, or people with disabilities who, my friend Stephen, for example, I was always convinced that they just thought, oh, well, here's a man with Down syndrome who's not up to much. We will just allow him to die in his own time and not necessarily provide the healthcare that's required to give him a quality of life that he deserves. I'm not convinced of that. With my own dad, his doctor was someone who didn't really attend to the actual causes of my dad's illness, and my dad died as a result. And the thing was that when that happened to my dad, I said to him, I think you need a new GP because this one's not doing you much good. And he said, oh, no, Bubby, that's okay. I can do this and he's do that, because people trust their GPs. The GP is the modern priest. How many people will tell the GP all the problems they've got? And it's okay if your GP is trustworthy or interested in you, in spite of the fact that you're old and disabled and all of that. But what happens if they're not? And there's all these areas, I think, that are not, we can't be certain about them. And I think that it would be a good thing for there to be more Buddhist chaplains in hospitals who can help people deal with pain and suffering. People who are trained specifically for that role, not just Buddhists, but anybody of good faith.
Yeah, I think Deborah has urgently wants to express something. We will, after Deborah, we'll come to you, Sue. Yeah, Deborah.
Oh, hello, Thay. I was thinking it's not just a question of pain as well. Sometimes it's a question of dignity. I'm a pastoral care worker, but I'm not a medical person, so I don't understand the which diseases it would be. But with some diseases, it's not so much pain, but it's more just, you're relying on other people to eat and to go to the toilet. You maybe can't move, maybe can't even swallow, and there's very little dignity in that situation. And I guess it's just underlying what you said, Thay, about it being black and white, because I do understand that as a Buddhist person, I shouldn't be thinking that euthanasia is okay. But I think, if a person is in this situation and they're really suffering, where does suffering come into this? As Buddhists, we seek to ease suffering. And, I haven't made up my mind about this. I find it very complex and very confronting. And I would like not someone to tell me what to think, but someone to help me process my own thoughts on it. Because if I imagine myself in that situation, in a situation where I have no dignity because I can't even eat or do anything for myself, it doesn't have to be an issue of pain. The question then becomes, what is the meaning of life? And ideally, Thay, we would have pastoral care people and Buddhists to accompany that person and to really help them find their sources of strength and meaning. But there's not many people who can do that for someone. And so unless we're in that position ourselves, how do we know what we would feel? It's easy to say, well, as you say, it's black and white. But how do we make our own decisions? It's just a rhetorical question. Don't expect anyone to tell me. But thank you for getting us together to talk about this, because I think this is really important.
Susan Tui, you've got a question there.
Yes, I have, Thay. Can I say, first of all, I'm very sorry for the position of your brother. But I can also see that what makes it bearable for you is your commitment to be there with him till the end. But if you know that you can't be there with him to the end, that you have to consign this person that you love with dementia to, the public health system, isn't then there not more reason for him to get his wish and to depart early?
One of the other things I've done in my life as a job was be a human rights advocate for people with an intellectual disability or who are labelled in that way. I mean, I think it's a grotesque and awful label to put on people. People are people, no matter what. And one of the things that was always very clear was that if I was advocating for someone who was in hospital and subject to the medical profession, then the advocate or members of the family must always maintain a 24-hour presence, or as close to a 24-hour presence as they could, with that person to make sure that they were being watched over. And that would be my commitment to my brother. If it came to that, I don't know what would happen if I wasn't there. I'm his wife. His wife, my sister-in-law, is a fearless tigress when it comes to dealing with people who impact on her husband's life, and I'm really grateful for her presence. But if it were up to me, and it may well be up to me, I would maintain as much as I could, a 24-hour presence in his life towards the end, just to make sure that he wasn't being mistreated but I know not everyone can do that, and not everyone is up to that,
No.
I'm talking about an ideal kind of position, and I'm available for that. That's my job. That's my job description. But that's what I would try to do, and I would try in the company of people like Deborah Kelly and others to make sure that more and more people got involved in the contemplative care that we offer to not only people in palliative care, but people in oncology wards and things like that, where there is the great potential for death to come in oncology through cancer. It would be really good to encourage more and more Buddhists to, from my point of view, I mean, if I was a Christian, it would be other Christians as well, to skill up and become really, really strong advocates within hospitals and hospices for people. Almost, I don't like to use the term, but an army of chaplains or something like that, an army of people who would do this work of being alongside others in their hazard. Is that an answer to the question, Susan?
My mother died of Parkinson's dementia 2 years ago, and I could perform that role for her because I was there. But, a lot of people have no family.
That's right.
And because she had dementia, I think the thing that I found very hard was that to watch and not be able to do anything about was that she was at the mercy of many fantasies and hallucinations that she had no control over. So, the mind is not much help to you at this stage of life. I mean, as it happened, she died completely naturally, but the last several months were very hard. Yeah.
So even though her mind might not be up to it, was your mind up to it? Were you able to be there? And I just have this image of you holding her hand and holding her up, and even though she couldn't manage it, was there the possibility of things like guided meditations or just talking gently and that, or encouraging her to let go naturally?
All of those things were there. But you know, until the very end, I couldn't be with her 24 hours a day.
No.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, I want to take the easy way out and say, oh, well, that's samsara. And in a way it is, but it just points to the great complexities in life that life often seems not to be able to work the way we would want it to work. And we may have to live with our own grief about that. I don't know. No, I do know. I think that's the case. That I mean, it even comes down. You know, quite often people who are proponents of euthanasia, voluntary euthanasia, say, "Oh, well, you'd euthanize your dog. So why wouldn't you do that to a parent?" But I don't even like to use. I don't even want to euthanize my dog. I mean, there's such a sense of betrayal when that happens, and it's hard enough to lose your nearest and dearest little four-legged friend, but to instigate that is very challenging. So, you know, and it leaves you with all kinds of complex feelings, but I'm not sure how we get around that necessarily. Is that just the way of life? I don't know. I'm not certain about that. Did you feel that you had done everything you could? Did you feel that you had, you know, stood by your mum in a really...
Yes, but I know my mother had made a living will, and she had said that when she did not want to be kept alive, when she had, you know, lost control of her bodily functions, lost control of her mind, and she was. And I felt in a way that I had betrayed her.
By doing what?
By, you know, keeping her alive. Not that anyone was asking me, or she was asking me earlier in the process, you know, could I not get her some medication to take? And I said, no, I couldn't. And I said in the end that they should not take her to hospital if she fell. But that was as much as I felt I could do, apart from be with her. And I know that she did, you know, above everything, she didn't want that sort of an end.
Sorry.
Before we come to Faye, Faye has something to share. Faye, would you like to speak out, or you want me to read out your text? Faye, you can unmute yourself. Yeah, okay. Do you want to? Yeah.
Oh, I basically put that up for talking points rather than to have it as a big discussion, a bit of a background. As someone, my experience as a nurse, and I know this is not everybody's experience. Yep. Sorry, there we go. Not everybody's experience, and I'm not sure our care has improved over the 30 years since I haven't been there. But my experience was we kept people alive longer than they needed to be alive. I remember we resuscitated somebody who'd had a heart attack and was dying of cancer. And in those days, you didn't have a living will. So I think, I'm not sure I agree with euthanasia or not, but I do know that if I was in the patient's position, I would want them to be giving me pain medication. If I was coming to the end of my life and not likely to go home, I wouldn't want them to resuscitate me from a heart attack so that I then suffer for an additional 3 weeks and can't go home anyway. And when it came to my aunt's turn and she had a massive stroke, having gone from totally independent, and she was a mixed case, yes, which was people saying about not getting good care, in that surgery was offered and she didn't get a second opinion. And she got the side effect from the surgery left her with a stroke. She basically just refused to eat and have any medication except pain medication. I think the difficult part was for the family just sitting there, because she was perfectly mentally with it throughout this whole process, right up until the end, when it seems like she was able to see this transition to the next life where people had come to get her. So 12 months of suffering, but then died in peace. And her son always said, oh, she's got the walk of stubbornness. So in other words, once she'd made up her mind not to eat, not to take medication, that was it. So I don't know. Get around that. She wasn't asking for, I don't think she was asking people to like euthanize her, but she certainly didn't want to be where she was.
I think Anne's mom passed away last August. Sorry to hear about that, Anne. Yeah, your mom was in palliative care for about 3 weeks, but she did not require morphine, but she has no appetite and refused to eat. And when she was in palliative care, Anne was very concerned, but the facility allowed her to see her mom every day and chanted for her, which is really nice. Right.
And
so
I add,
yes, Anne.
Bante, my mom was 101. Even though she doesn't read or write, but because I think all her life, I mean, she goes to temple, she's used to the chanting. Even towards the end, the second last day before she passed away, when we chanted, she was so weak, but she could raise her hands. She knows, you know, that we found, I found it so enlightening that she knows that we were chanting for her and she could raise her hands. She was so weak. So my mom is sort of half demented, not fully demented, but you know.
Yeah, but Auntie was quite well. Auntie was very strong, isn't it? Until the last moment of her life. Yeah.
And when the nurses, after her hip surgery, when she came back to aged care, and they said they want to put her in palliative care, I was also worked up because in my mind it was like, oh well, we're letting her die quite quietly or whatever it is. So myself, my son, and all came asking, but shouldn't we take her back to the hospital so that we can put drips and whatever into her? And then the doctor came in and had a counsel with us to explain. It doesn't mean that because they gave her food, we tried to feed her all sorts of, you know, soft food and all that, but she just refused to eat. She drank a bit, but she just refused to eat. And finally she went off, you know, one morning. That's my experience. But coming from a strong Dharma background, I had this like palliative care. Oh my God, what am I doing? Is this right? Did I do the right thing? You know, I asked myself many times. But thank you for your enlightening talk, Bante, on different aspects of this subject.
And when you asked yourself, and did you do the right thing? What answer did you come up with? The right thing by your mother? Yeah,
because when I was with her, I mean, what we experienced with her was she was they bathe her on the bed. I mean, wet toweling. They feed her. They brought food. Everything was normal. You know, she wasn't given even morphine. The only thing she took was osteopanadol in her case. That's my experience.
But ain't never in Auntie's life that she ever indicated to end her life in any way, right? She lived a very, very fulfilling life, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So she never asked for anything like that, right? She's
No.
She's quite satisfied until the end of her this physical life.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the most important thing to see. I think a lot of people who discuss here, it's they encounter some either physical and mental suffering, and they have to make that decision.
Yeah, it's just that for me, like I associate palliative care with, oh my God, am I killing somebody? Like, am I putting them there? You know, when it is not ethical to do. That is me. I have to handle that part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's really important to investigate the palliative care options that are available to you and to choose the one that's actually fits with your values and how you want your mother to be. I have to say that I worked as a chaplain at the Whittle Palliative Care Unit in Hobart, and even I thought, I think I'd like to die here because it was such a wonderful place, and there was never any thought of euthanasia or even excessive use of medication to bring a quick end to a person's life. What I noticed with a lot of the people that I worked with was a great deal of love offered to the dying person by the staff. I think that was the thing that impressed me most. Now, Molly has said something. What Molly? Why do you say?
Hello, Bante. Thank you.
Yeah, Molly.
Why I said that, right? Well, I said that because we are talking about euthanasia, whereas it seems to me that we are moving towards a different thing, because euthanasia is a choice to whether we want to die or we want to live. And that is a personal choice. Whatever you say, whatever the Buddha says, it doesn't really matter, because if I am prepared for the karma that I will face, if I should choose to take my life, then so be it. So it will be a voluntary euthanasia, so that you do not involve other people as little as possible, unless I can't do it myself, but then that's too late. But if as long as I could do it myself, then it's my own karma that I have to face. And that is euthanasia rather than palliative care. Palliative care is obviously the thing to do if I'm to be at that stage. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have come to 9 o'clock, and there's a lot. I think it's still a lot of questions in people's mind. But I think that's probably there's a constant topic that that we will have to continue to explore ourselves. I think I also think about what Bante talking about. Sometimes people are trying to ease out of life, and yeah, that's something also ponder in my mind as well. It's like, are we supposed to face adversity, like in this life, and evolve and progress? I think everyone, like Molly said, everyone has their own opinion, and I think everyone are entitled to their choices in their life and face their own karma or consequences, isn't it, Thay?
I agree with that too. Yes, but I just can't make that choice for myself.
Yeah,
I don't want to be asked to make that choice for my brother as well. What Kaliko said, we can't we can't encourage people to take their own lives. But even if I wasn't a monk, I still wouldn't want that. I still wouldn't want to have to make that choice. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Thay, and thank you so much, Bhante, and everyone here tonight and in this talk. So with that, I thank you and good night, everyone. We also put our hand together and thank you, Thay. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.